Let me see.
Well, good morning again. This week we are going to continue talking practically about what it means to develop hearts of gratitude in our kids and to decrease entitlement in our kids and even in ourselves. We talked about technology last week, and I hope that you've been thinking about that and that has been influencing the way that you parent your kids, even the way that you parent yourself maybe. We're going to continue today and talk about what it means to develop a heart of obedience in our kids. Because here's what I need you to recognize before we go forward today, and that is the fact that gratefulness and obedience are tied to each other. Gratefulness and obedience are tied to each other, and maybe you've never thought about that. So let me explain, because entitlement says, I'm in charge. I run the show here. What I want is what we get. What I want to do is what we do. I am the top priority. But for obedience to take place, we can't have that attitude. And so tied in very tightly with this big picture goal that we're shooting for of gratitude in the hearts of our kids and decreasing entitlement in our homes means that we also want to have obedient kids. Those things are tied together. They really do work together, which means that the first step in obedience for our kids is decreasing that entitlement. Do you see how that works together? So we've been addressing that first part of decreasing entitlement. We've been talking about that, but today we're going to move to that second part of how do we develop this heart of obedience in our kids? Now, always remember, as I'm talking about us developing, it's not us doing that work, right? It's God working through us, using us as his tool to change the hearts of our kids. But I think as we do this, there are 4 very practical steps that we can follow. And so the first thing that we have to do when we're training obedience is establish authority. When our kids are entitled, they believe that they run the show, that they are the ones who are in charge, that the rules don't apply to them. So the very first step is to begin to correct this pattern of thinking. And this really requires 2 things from our kids that are not natural. First, humility. They have to be taught in a loving way that they don't actually know everything, and that there are people in their lives they should listen to and learn from. And second, establishing authority in the eyes of our kids requires acknowledging a standard of absolute truth. It requires admitting that there is absolute truth. Otherwise, all the rules become subjective, and our kids have no reason to obey because rules just become a matter of opinion without absolute truth. Now, the culture that we live in today is adamant that truth is subjective and tolerance is expected. We feel that, don't we? That we are expected to tolerate. But why is that? Why are we so set on subjective truth? On truth being whatever your truth is. That's fine. I think it's because we mistakenly think that this brings freedom. Well, you can believe whatever you want. You're free to do whatever you want. Whatever is right for you is right. And we mistakenly think that this means freedom. Freedom to think what you want. Freedom to do what you want. Freedom from the rules and the opinions of other people. But here's the reality. Subjective truth feels like it would be freedom, but that's actually a lie. It actually leads to guilt and shame and bondage. Listen to John 8:31 and 32. It says, if you abide in my word, then you're truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. God says that absolute truth brings freedom, not subjective truth. So practically, how do we establish this in the heart of our kids? How do we establish authority with them? Well, first, we just have to act as if we are the parent and they are the kids, and not vice versa. So we do things like require respect from our kids. We give respect to our kids. We teach simple things like manners, and we model those manners and kindnesses for our kids. And we begin to have expectations of our children. We allow and enforce consequences, and we treat our kids in this consistent, loving way that balances grace and expectation. We have to have a blend of both of those. Now, I want you to hear me clearly on this when I say we need to act like the parent. There's a big difference in being a godly authority figure and someone who just thrives on the power of being in charge. And that's how some parents operate, isn't it? It's just this power struggle of, no, I'm bigger than you. I'm the one in charge. What I say goes. You'll do it because I said so. Now, if you haven't said that to your kid yet, I promise that day will come, and that phrase will come out of your mouth. But as a general principle, we don't want to operate as a parent who is just thriving on the fact that they're in charge. Because a godly parent holds these same two things, humility and absolute truth, for themselves. It's not just something that we expect of our kids, it's also something that we require of ourselves. And so we model a humble spirit for our kids. We show our kids that we are not the ultimate authority. We also answer to an authority. And we have to be willing to live in this structure of God being our authority before we can ask our kids to live under our authority as well as God's. That's how God designed it, and that's how He intended for it to be. And so this first step is for us to see ourselves as a God-ordained authority over our kids. Not a self-proclaimed authority, but also not someone who just wants to be their friend and their source of happiness. We have to see ourselves as the God-ordained authority over our children. And so once we've begun to establish authority, the next step is to cultivate obedience. Now, we have to realize obedience is not just following orders. True obedience is actually a heart attitude that is expressed in behavior. Okay, I'm going to say that again. True obedience is a heart attitude that is expressed in behavior. It's an attitude of humility that submits to authority. Not to just check a box, not to just follow the command, but because your heart is actually submitting in obedience. I want to look at Luke 15 as an example of this, and it's the story of the prodigal son, and we're going to kind of read through it, and I want to point out a couple of things to you. This is going to be up on the screen, but it says in Luke 15, and he said, he being telling this parable, Jesus, he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. Entitlement, right? And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, meaning he kind of came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But here I am perishing with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And so that's what he did. He arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." Now, you've probably heard this story before. And we see entitlement in the heart of this young man as he goes off and he wants what he deserves, and he's going to go and do life his own way. But as he experienced the consequences of his choice, the father didn't do anything to make this situation harder on his son. He let him experience the consequences of his choice, and that turned his heart to gratefulness. There's a lot we could learn from the prodigal son, but today I want us to finish the story because this is what I really want us to look at. Let's pick back up in verse 25, and it says, "Now the man's older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound.'" She'll look at the next verse. "But he, the older brother, was angry and refused to go in. And his father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, 'Look, all these many years I have served you. I have never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat even, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours,'" you know how when we say, your kid to your husband? That's kind of what he's saying here. "But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him.' And he said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found.'" Now, a lot of times it's easy for us to look at this story as a contrast between the younger son who rebelled and went his own way and hit rock bottom, and the older son who stayed and was faithful to the family and obedient and did what he was supposed to do. But really what we see in this story is not only a disobedient younger son, but we also see an older son who was doing the right thing on the outside, but his heart was not in the right place. It's kind of like that little boy who refused to sit down in his chair. And his mom kept saying, "Sit down." And he refused, and she kept telling him to sit down. And finally, he sat down. But he looked at her and he said, "I might be sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside." That's this older son in this story. And there are going to be times that our kids are going to be that way. That's not the type of obedience that we want. It's a start, but true and complete obedience includes having the right heart attitude. So how do we develop this in our kids? Well, if you were with us when we did love and discipline last year, you've heard us talk about this process for discipline of teach, train, and correct. We're going to follow the same process here. First, we're going to teach our kids what an obedient heart looks like and how it behaves. We model this to them. We tell them about it. We build their understanding of what we expect from them. And then we train them. We remind them of what we expect. We give them a chance to learn and practice with those behaviors, all the while helping to train them and guide them and redirect them. And then finally, we begin to correct their behavior when their heart and their behavior require it. When our kids are younger, a lot of times we have to kind of step in and create a consequence. You know, when they take a toy from their sibling, we have to create a consequence. As our kids get older, many times, all we have to do is stay out of the way and let the consequences happen. But the result of these choices and behaviors, both positive behaviors and negative, we have to let the consequences fall onto our children. When they exhibit a positive behavior and they have the right heart, then they need to learn to be proud of themselves. They need to see that we are proud of them. We need to be reinforcing that with our words so that they will repeat that behavior. But when they fail, they need to experience those consequences so that they know that next time they need to do something differently. If they never learn these skills, we are handicapping our kids. They are debilitated in the future because they never connect the dots between their choices and the outcomes. And so they begin to say things like, well, it's not my fault. Well, I didn't make that happen. I couldn't help it. And they begin to blame others and they refuse to take responsibility. So allowing the consequences to land on our kids helps them to develop problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills. And this is hard sometimes. It's hard to see our kids miss out on something, or it's hard to see our kids fail at something. It's hard to see our kids pay negative consequences. But we have to do it now. You have to do it while your kids are still little and the stakes are small. I know that they don't seem small when you're in the moment, but I guarantee you the stakes are small when they forget their homework in the first grade versus when they do it in high school, or they don't keep up with their assignments in college or in the future at their job. And if we're not allowing them to learn from those things and connect the dots between their actions and their consequences, we're setting them up for failure in the real world. But then also, as we're cultivating and developing obedience in our kids, we need to remember that true obedience brings joy. We forget about that. Don't we? A lot of times we see obedience as a negative thing. Well, I've got to do this. This is what God wants me to do, so I've got to do it. No, obeying him actually brings joy. And so we've got to cultivate this in our kids, and you can use rewards to help them understand that positive choices bring positive consequences. It brings good things. Now, I don't want you to confuse rewards and bribes. Remember that a reward is something set up in advance, and it encourages right choices. If you don't make right choices, you don't get the reward. That's how it works. But a bribe is like this bargaining chip that gets thrown out in the heat of a moment that says, if you will stop behaving this way and start behaving this way, then I will get you whatever you want. A bribe is what we use when things are melting down in the grocery store and we're just trying to get out, right? But a reward is set up in advance. And so an example looks like this. If you're going to the grocery store And you stop, and before you get out of the car, you say, here's what I expect of you. If you can ride in the cart or walk beside us, holding on to the cart, staying with us, not begging for everything that you see. Whatever your rules are, you lay those out ahead of time. You say, if you can follow the rules, then when we're finished shopping, I'll let you pick out something, whatever your something is, whether that's a piece of candy or a coloring book or whatever your reward is. On the other hand, if you're in the middle of the store and your kid's dragging things off the shelves and they're having a fit because you won't buy them the cereal that they wanted, and you say, okay, if you'll just stop crying, I'll get it. That's a bribe, okay? So take that minute in the car, set that up ahead of time, set those rewards ahead of time. It takes thought, it takes effort, but it pays off, and it teaches our kids the joy of obedience, whereas bribes only teach them to be better manipulators. I don't know about your kids, but mine didn't need any help or any extra practice with that. But rewards, when they're used appropriately, can help you connect obedience with joy in the heart of your child. So we've established authority. We're working to cultivate obedience. And the next and really important step is for you to expect obstacles. You need to know that your kid will not like discipline. They will not like the process of learning to obey. None of us do. So as you move into training obedience with your kids, know that when you correct them, they're not just going to say, oh, Mom, you are so right. I can see now that was a really bad choice that I made to hit my sister. They're not going to do that. They're going to go to, well, it's not my fault. She was doing it first. I had to. Expect that. Expect the pushback. Expect that they're going to be mad at you when you enforce a consequence. It's just part of the game, guys. It's part of the job. But if you know that your kids are going to react and you're prepared for it, guess what? It's no big thing. You're ready to deal with it. And it'll be much easier for you to stay the course as you're training obedience. But also, if we know that there are going to be obstacles for our kids as we're parenting them, then we have to teach our kids how to navigate those obstacles. One of the things in parenting now is to not train your kids for the path, but to prepare the path for your kids so that they don't have any obstacles. Let me tell you, there's only so far that you can do that. And at some point, they are going to have to learn how to navigate those obstacles themselves. They're going to have to learn how to problem solve for themselves. They are going to have to learn to expect obstacles in their path. So I want to give you just a simple structure for helping your kids learn, because it's easy for us as parents to jump in and take over, isn't it? So number one is empathize with your child. Say things to them like, oh man, it must have been really hard for you to walk up to your teacher and tell them that you forgot your homework today. How'd that go? Empathize with them. Put yourself on their team. And then ask them, so what's your plan for navigating that next time? Now, when your kids are younger, they may need a little bit of help navigating a plan, but here's the important part. Let them come up with a plan before you give them one. At least let them help create a plan, because you're teaching them to think. You're teaching them to problem solve. You're guiding them through the process. So for your kid who's forgotten his homework for the 20th time this year, it's saying, okay, what's your plan for doing this next time? You know what that communicates to them? I believe you can do this. I believe you can be successful with this. Let's come up with a plan for you to do that. So empathize with your child. Ask them, what's your plan? And let them come up with one. And then all you have to say is, that's great. Let me know if you need my help. And step back a little bit. And that is the hardest thing to do as a parent. But it will pay off because you will have to parent less as your kids get older because they're learning to problem solve. Not just for this specific situation, but they're learning to problem solve in general in life. And I love what our author, Kristen Welch, says on page 113. She says, obedience is a learned behavior that places our authority over our kids. It's a learned behavior. It takes practice. It's not something that our kids are born with or not born with. They can learn how to obey, and we can help them. But we can't rescue our kids. We have to allow those natural consequences to land on them. When they forget their homework, we have to be okay that there is a 0 for that assignment. Hopefully you don't have a teacher like my oldest Caroline did in the 2nd grade who I met with her because Caroline just kept forgetting her homework, and she would pick it up and she would just lay it down somewhere instead of on her way to put it in her backpack. And it just never would get there. And I finally met with her teacher, and this was in the 2nd grade, so not an unreasonable expectation here. And her teacher was like, I just love Caroline. She's just the greatest. And I mean, maybe you're just expecting a little too much. And I was like, really? Like to take her piece of paper and put it inside her backpack? I don't think so. So I hope you don't have that teacher that doesn't allow those natural consequences to play out. But as parents, we have to let those consequences play out. Because if we don't teach our kids to problem solve now around those obstacles, they won't be able to do it when the stakes are higher. So empathize with them, encourage problem solving, but don't rescue. And then the hardest of all is refuse to say, I told you so. When your kid comes home and they say, Mom, I forgot my homework again. Or the worst, I did my homework, but I forgot to turn it in. Yep, I told you that was going to happen. That doesn't work. That just sets you and your child against each other. Let the consequences be the teacher, but expect those obstacles. When my kids were in school, I used to give them kind of one pass a semester. You know, you forgot your homework, you forgot your lunch, whatever it was that you forgot at home. I kind of had one pass for each of them. I'll bring it to you because, I mean, we all forget things, right? And some of it is teaching your kids, like, we're a family. We depend on each other. We help each other out. There's grace for you when you're occasionally forgetting something. But I had 3 kids at the same elementary school for a couple of years. And so I got to know those secretaries very well. And I told them, I said, okay, look, this is my rule. Like, everybody gets a free pass. But if you see me continually coming back for the same kid, I want you to just like look at me and say, yeah, you've been here before. Turn yourself around, right back out the door. But it was hard for me to keep up, you know, because 3 kids and homework and lunches and all the things. And so one day I walked in the office, and there was one of the secretaries. She was quiet, and she was working at her desk, and she just kind of, she gives me the look. And I knew exactly what she meant. And I said, I've been here before for this kid, right? And she just goes, mm-hmm. I was like, okay. So let the consequences happen. Your kids will learn best by their own failures, and you won't have to be the bad guy. You can be the person who empathizes with them and says, oh no, like that's horrible. I know that was so hard. How did that feel? Okay, I don't want that to happen again. What's your plan for next time? That sounds great. Well, let me know how I can help you. And I'm telling you, that will be like magic in your parenting. Because learning for them doesn't mean that we don't help them. It doesn't mean that we don't guide them. It doesn't mean, hey, you need to learn how to solve problems, so figure it out on your own. Learning takes time and it takes practice. But for us as parents, sometimes just jumping in and doing it for them is faster, it has a better result, and it's easier on us, right? But let's not make a habit of parenting out of ease. So focus on the long game. Don't get discouraged by the short term. Stay the course. And remember, Satan is the one who wants you to feel like a failure, who wants you to feel like your kids are failing, who wants you to feel like you're doing parenting all wrong and that you've screwed up and it's kind of a lost cause. But God tells us that that's not the case. In Lamentations 3:22 and 23, he says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end, and they are new every morning." So as you're going through this process of cultivating a heart of obedience in your kids, there's going to be days that you mess up. And guess what? Tomorrow is a new day. God's mercies are new every morning. It's just a reminder of how we all need God's grace. And so as we're diligent to teach these things, to establish authority, to cultivate obedience, to expect and overcome those obstacles, you are going to reap a reward of resilience in your kids. They're going to be tough. You're going to reap the reward of respect and of responsibility. Galatians 6:9 tells us, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Pay me now or pay me later, right? This is one of those things. If you pay now, I promise it will pay off later. Even on the days where it doesn't feel like you are even making a dent in your kids' behaviors, you will reap the rewards of what you're investing in your kids as you help them develop a heart that finds joy in obedience. Let me pray for us. God, thank you. God, I just thank you for the way that your word teaches us, for the way that your rules work in our lives, God. It's so easy to see them as restrictions or things that are keeping us from something, when in reality, God, they are leading us. They are leading us to an abundant life. They're leading us to joy. They're leading us to positive consequences instead of negative. And so, God, would you teach our own hearts the joy of obedience, and then would you use us to teach our kids that there's joy in obeying you. There's joy in doing things like you tell us to do them. Would you give us courage? Would you give us wisdom? Would you give us the mental wherewithal to respond appropriately in the moment? To not respond in anger, to not respond in rescue, God. But to help our kids see that their choices have consequences. And they have the ability to decide whether those are positive consequences or negative consequences. God, we love you and praise you and just ask that you would be with us as we parent our kids. In Jesus' name, amen.